Morning, it's Pastor Jeff with your Sunday morning message. Thank you so much for tuning in with us this morning. So this morning I'm going to start this off like it's a youth event, like it's our youth ministry on Wednesday night. We'll start it off with a little bit of an icebreaker. So we're going to play a game together. So adults, I know you're watching. You're like, nope, not playing a game. You're watching this from your living room. You're watching this from your bedroom, from wherever you're watching this. I need you to participate, okay? We're going to play Simon Says. And if you don't understand how Simon Says works, I say Simon says, and whatever Simon says, you do. If I say anything without saying Simon says, you do not do those things, okay? So Simon says, put your right hand up, okay? Put it up in the air. Simon says, take your right hand and make a circle, just like this, okay? Now put your hand down. All right. If you put your hand down, you're out. You don't understand how Simon Says works, but it's okay. So now Simon says, take that circle and put it on your chin, okay? And Simon says, take your left hand and poke your chin through that hole. You can't do it, can you? Why? Because if you watched me, you took your circle and you put it on your cheek instead of on your chin. You see, it's proof that people watch what you do more than they hear what you say. And so today we're talking about the fruits of the Spirit, and we're working through the fruits of the Spirit, which we've decided and we know to be true. They are byproducts of a walk with Jesus. And these are things that will show up. So the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, patience, goodness, kindness, self-control. And so as we work through those things, today we're on kindness. And so I want to think about what kindness is. We can't tell people to be kind. We can't tell our children, hey, you have to be kind. We need to show them kindness. We need to treat them with kindness, and they need to see us treating others with kindness. That's how we come to know these things. Kindness is a learned behavior. It's a byproduct of a walk with Jesus, but it's something you learn as you go. I had a friend of mine who was a pastor, and he was arguing with his son because his son had just gotten in an argument with his younger siblings, and he was screaming at them. So the dad walks over to him and says, son, walk over here with me. And he walked over and dad was heated. He says, listen, son, we do not raise our voice and yell to get what we want. You hear me? And the son just looked at him like, and the dad says, just go. You see, you realize he said, we don't raise our voices while he raised his voice. We don't yell at people to get what we want, although he was yelling at his son. So sometimes we do things we don't even realize we are saying things contrary or doing things contrary to what we're saying. Webster defines kindness as of sympathetic, forbearing, gentle, pleasant nature. Hebrew, it is cheesed, C-H-E-S-E-D, not like our cheese. And it literally means to treat courteously and appropriately. It's also translated as loving kindness. In the Greek, it's chestodes, which literally means useful, pleasant, and gracious. The Greek word here, Christos, which appears in the New Testament 10 times and is translated in the King James Version 4 times as kindness, 4 times as goodness, and 1 time as gentleness. So the math says it can mean several things, but they all are wrapped up in one thing, an attitude of being meek, of being gentle, and of being kind. Put them all together, and we would define it this way, putting together biblical examples. Kindness is caring enough about others that we treat them with what? Gentleness, graciousness, and generosity. That's what kindness is. So let's start with gentleness. In order to appreciate what gentleness is, we have to first understand what it is not. Gentleness is not a personality type. Both big personalities and quiet personalities, those who are boisterous and larger than life, and those who are quiet and withdrawn, are called to be gentle. Gentleness is not a stoic lack of emotion. Gentleness is the moderation of emotion, not its absence thereof. I teach athletes to be neutral. because our emotions will get the best of us. Your emotions are biased, okay? What I mean by that is when things are going well and emotionally you feel great and amazing and you're pumped up, you think everything's great. What's the flip side of that? When emotionally you're down and you make a mistake or you make an error or you strike out, then everything seems bad. Our emotions are biased and they make us think that everything is as that last play was. So gentleness is not a lack of emotion, it's moderation of emotion. Gentleness is not weakness. Gentleness is a form of strength that it enables a distinctive kind of agency that, in the long run, is the most productive kind of lifestyle. And finally, gentleness is not merely being nice. The gentle person is not someone who is never disagreeing. It's not someone that never gets upset or upsets the status quo. In fact, there's a kind of niceness that is the counterfeit form of true and godly gentleness, and that's being fake. It's not reacting when you need to react. Gentleness, then, is a form of temperance and moderation. The meekness that comes from above comes not only in Jesus, but through Jesus. We can learn it by watching him. Did Jesus get mad and flip the tables when the temple was being used as something it shouldn't be, as something it should not be? Yes, he did. Did he flip tables and crack whips and run people out of there? Yes, he did. Was Jesus the most gentle human being there ever was? Yes, he was. Was he the kindest? Yes, he was. So it's not a lack of emotion. It's not a lack of reacting, and it's not a lack of doing what's right when it needs to be done. Because it is a form of temperance, gentleness is distinct from self-control. With self-control, our anger is held in check. Like a fierce dog that only when muzzled is able to be walked through downtown or walked in crowds. Self-control restrains our passions. With gentleness, our anger is tamed and trained by wisdom, like that exact same dog that's able to walk peacefully through the neighborhood, down the sidewalks, and near other dogs, other cats, and other people, held only by a leash. Gentleness is more than self-restraint. It is self-mastery. Gentleness is the moderation, not the absence of anger. Gentleness is the virtuous middle road between prideful anger and lazy apathy. Gentleness is opposed to all forms of prideful anger, but gentleness is also opposed to lazy apathy and insensitivity. The person who is cool with everything, who is never disagreeable, who always compliments and never criticizes, is not necessarily gentle. They're fake. There are some things we should not put up with for the sake of keeping the peace. We should fight for what's right. We should defend our families. We should fight for our children, and we should fight for our spouses and our loved ones. There are some cases where a failure to be angry is a failure with respect to virtue. Meekness is not opposed to all forms of anger. The meek person does not forsake all desire for vengeance when wronged. That is an impossible and humanly unattainable mindset. That's not biblical meekness. The meek person entrusts vengeance to God. Sometimes there are situations where someone does somebody wrong, and you can just sit back and go, God will take care of that. God will fix that. Next is graciousness. It's gentleness, graciousness, and generosity. So graciousness, what is grace? Some people today define grace as God's riches at Christ's expense. Others gloss it as unconditional gift or undeserved favor. Still others prefer to see it as God's favorable disposition toward his people. But the word grace in the New Testament Greek, which is charis, simply means gift. And the content of the gift is determined by its context. In Ephesians chapter 2, we read, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not of your own doing, it is the gift of God." That's why these fruits of the Spirit aren't things we have to force on ourselves. And they aren't things we have to learn. And they aren't things that we have to become in order to experience God's love, His grace, and His mercy. Actually, what we need to do is experience and accept the free gift of God's love, of salvation, and of God's daily grace and mercy. And then these things will be added to it. These things will show up later. 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." God's power is made perfect when you're weak, when you don't know what to do, when you can't do anything. And what about 1 Corinthians 15:10? "By the grace of God, I am what I am, and His grace toward me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is within me." So the more fitting definition of grace in these two passages in Corinthians seems to be power. Grace is God's power manifested in Paul's weaknesses and in his ability to work harder and in the others. So do we give grace? Not exactly. God gives grace and we dispense it. We share it. We understand that they make mistakes, so do we. We understand that when people anger us, they are in need of grace, so are we. We realize that others sin and fall short of God's glory, so do I. Next is generosity. What about 2 Corinthians 8:3-4? Do the descriptions of unconditional gift, undeserved favor, or favorable disposition work in this setting for generosity? It says the Macedonian believers gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor, which is the same word as grace, of taking part in the relief of the saints. Grace here is not the immaterial gift of salvation or spiritual power. Rather, grace is the material gift of money or of resources. And that might surprise you. Have you ever described the act of giving money as the giving of grace? Paul does. He does it repeatedly in 2 Corinthians 8-9. Not just once, but 6 times. He does it again in chapter 8, verses 4, 6, 7, chapter 19, 9, 8, and 15. The money bag he carried from these predominantly Gentile churches to the poor saints in Jerusalem is strangely enough defined as grace. He calls it a bag of grace. Why? Jesus died on a cross for you to pay for your sins in a way that you can never repay him. True generosity is an example of kindness, and it's giving to someone knowing they can never repay you. Paul was carrying a money bag to other countries where people would never know where the money came from. When you give, when you serve, when you do something nice for someone, when you are an example of graciousness, goodness, kindness, and generosity, do the recipients know it's you? Do they know that it came from you? Because if they do, that's your gift. If they don't, that's grace. And that's the difference in what true generosity is. It's giving and no one ever knowing you gave. It's helping someone out and no one ever knowing that you helped them out. One of our favorite ways to give with our nonprofit Jimmy Jam is completely anonymously. To be able to cut a check or send cash or buy a gift card and give it to someone who's giving it to someone and them never know where it came from. Why? Because that's the way God gives grace. We know where it comes from, but we can't repay it. We don't want someone repaying us because they feel like they have to. We want someone showing grace to someone else because they were a recipient of ours. Christ's self-giving love is the paradigm for human expressions of material grace toward others, and we don't grasp that. If you think for a second that your giving at your church doesn't matter, you're wrong. You're completely wrong. This pastor has gone without a paycheck before. I don't care. It made things tight at home. It made it tough to pay the bills. But I don't do this for a paycheck. But if you think your giving doesn't make a difference in the life of your pastor, in the life of your church, in the upkeep of the building, and in the ways that we can impact the community, you're very sadly wrong. And your generosity is huge. It's a re-gifting of God's grace, of the ways that maybe God has blessed you in some financial way. Give to your church, not Freedom. If you go to another church, give to your church. Invest in the life of your pastor, because you know what? He invests several hours a week just bringing you a 20 to 30 minute message. It's 3 to 4 hours of preparation, maybe 5, depends on the topic. And he answers your phone calls, and he performs your funerals, and he does your weddings. He's fully invested in your family and in your life. If God has given you grace, return that grace in a monetary gifted form. Interestingly enough, the only 2 instances where the phrase the grace of God appears is in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, and it's when Paul speaks of God's giving versus human giving. He says the surpassing grace of God on you. What's the connection? God's divine gift of grace fuels the human giving of grace to others. God's grace is obviously far different from ours. Consider 2 Corinthians 9, 7, and 8. After stating that God loves a cheerful giver, that's a requote of Proverbs 22:8, Paul takes a step back to explain the source of our giving. He says this: God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work, which is human grace. Also, 2 Corinthians 9:11, you will be enriched in every way by God to be generous in every way toward others. You see, divine grace propels human giving. David also declared, all things come from you. That's 1 Chronicles 29:14. And John the Baptist also affirms what David declared. He says, a person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given to him from heaven. That's John 3:27. And James agrees in chapter 1, verse 17 of James. Every good and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights. Kindness is not just putting on a fake smile and being nice. It's being generous. It's allowing God's grace to flow not to you, but through you. Think about a time when someone has gone through the drive-thru. We call it random acts of kindness. That's not really kindness. That's really just good things, doing good things. When someone goes through the drive-thru, say you're at Dunkin' Donuts. You go through the drive-thru, you pay for yours, you pay for the car behind you. And so they've done studies to see how long this lasts. It always gets broken. And sometimes it doesn't get broken by someone who is unappreciative. It gets broken by someone who is blown away. Sometimes we're so blown away by God's goodness and God's grace and God's love that we forget to re-give it. Earlier this morning, I was running downtown, and I planned it when the sunrise is happening, even though I knew it was going to be cloudy and I knew I wouldn't be able to see it. And so I'm running down the bayfront, and I'm turned to the left on my way through. And then I'm turned to my right on the way back through. As I cross the bridge and come back across, I'm cutting to the right, and I'm looking, waiting to see the sunrise. And I can't, because the clouds are so strong that I can see that bright orange as it's about to ascend, but then I don't get to see it coming up. And I turn the corner where the Ford is. I usually park where the Ford is, in the Ford parking lot. I park, and I start looking, and the sky is majestic, and the sky is amazing. I was so busy looking for the sunrise that I missed all the good work that was going on the other side. The clouds were dark gray and white and light gray. The sky was orange and light blue and bright blue. And it was just this majestic picture that I had completely missed because I was looking for the sun. grace, sometimes we're looking so hard for it, we completely miss it. And sometimes we're looking for ways to use it, and we completely miss it. We are called to be kind, and it is a dispenser of God's grace. Ultimately, humans do not receive from, but through other humans. The giver is God. And why will humans direct their thanksgiving to God rather than the human giver? Because ultimately humans do not receive from him. They receive from other humans. It's not just monetary things, it's love, and it's kindness, and it's joy, and it's other forms of reverence that we get from personal relationships with other people who believe in Jesus the same way we do. The Greek word Chrestos, Chrestos, means kind. And the Greek word Christos, Christos, means Christ. And in the first century, the believers were so kind that many people did not know whether their title was follower of Christ or follower of kindness. To the unchurched world, we should appear as generous and gracious and kind. Have a great day and God bless.